there is a question that has haunted philosophy for 2,500 years. And it begins not with an abstract idea, but with a single morning in a city that believed itself to be the center of the civilized world. What does it mean to die for what you know to be true? On a spring morning in 399 BC, the city of Athens woke up and went about its business. Potters opened their workshops. Merchants arranged their stalls. Children ran through narrow streets, while the smell of bread and charcoal drifted from the doorways of stone houses. And somewhere near the western edge of the Agora, in a small stone building that most people walked past without a second glance, a 70-year-old man was spending the last hours of his life talking about the immortality of the soul. His name was Socrates. And today, you are going to walk through the city that killed him. In TI's video, I use modern AI tools to reconstruct ancient Athens. As it existed on that specific day, the streets, the buildings, the rituals, the crowds. We are going to move through a city that has not existed in this form for over 2,000 years. And we are going to understand not just the architecture, but the world that produced one of the most consequential deaths in all of human history. Not because Socrates was a saint, not because Athens was a villain, but because what happened on that day was deeply, painfully human. And the city itself tells the story better than any biography ever could. Let us begin at dawn. The sky above Athens lightens from black to deep violet before it ever turns blue. The city sits on a flat plain in the region of Attica, and when you stand at its edge in the early morning, you can see the mountains that ring it. Hymettus to the east, Pentelicus to the north, Agalios to the west. Athens is not a large city by modern standards. Its population in 399 BC is somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 people, depending on whether you count the citizens, the medics, the resident foreigners, the women, the children, and the enslaved population. The civic population of male citizens who can vote and hold office is far smaller, perhaps 30,000. These are the men who condemned Socrates. The city is dominated, absolutely and unarguably, by a single rock. The Acropolis raises 150 meters above the plain. It is not subtle. There is nothing modest about it. The great flat-topped limestone outcrop juts from the earth like something the gods pushed up from below, and atop it, gleaming white and gold in the early morning light, stands the most perfect building that the ancient world ever produced. The Parthenon. You have seen photographs of the ruin. Forget them. Stand Harry in 399 BC. And look at what it actually is. The temple is complete. Its marble is not yet the honey brown color you know from the photographs. It is white, almost painfully white, and across its sculpted friezes and pediments, traces of paint still cling. Deep reds and blues and golds mark the figures of gods and heroes locked in eternal combat. The statue of Athena, inside the Athena Parthenos, created by Phidias, stands 12 meters tall, constructed from ivory and gold. You cannot look at it in the direct light without squinting. It is meant to do this. It is meant to make you feel small. The Parthenon was completed in 432 BC, roughly 30 years before the day we are walking through. It was built during the age of Pericles, funded largely by the tribute money from Athens' empire. The Delian League, a network of allied city-states whose treasury Athens had, with considerable audacity, moved to Athens itself. Pericles called it a monument to Athenian greatness. Critics, then and now, called it something closer to theft. Made beautiful. But here is what matters on this specific morning. The Parthenon is not just a building. It is an argument. It says, we are civilized. We are favored by the gods. We are the pinnacle of what human beings can achieve. And somewhere below this gleaming argument, in a modest cell, the man who spent his entire life questioning such arguments is waiting to drink hemlock. The path down from the Acropolis takes you through the propylaea, the monumental gateway that serves as the entrance to the sacred rock. Its columns are Doric and Ionic both, a deliberate fusion, and as you pass through them, the city opens up below you in a way that makes you stop. Athens, in 399 BC, is a maze of streets that have no formal grid, no urban planning in any modern sense. The streets follow the logic of old footpaths, of donkey tracks, of centuries of habit. The houses are modest, most, Athenian homes are single-story or at most two-story structures built from mud brick on stone foundations. They face inward, toward private courtyards, presenting blank walls to the street. Privacy and public life in Athens are very carefully separated. The streets themselves are narrow, unpaved in most places, and in the early morning they smell of the previous day of cooking fires and human waste and the particular dusty warmth of a Mediterranean city before the heat of the day arrives. Dogs move through the alleys. A man with a donkey loaded with vegetables is navigating a corner. Two women with clay water jugs are walking toward the fountain house at the end of the block, speaking quietly. They will not be present for what happens today. Athenian women of citizen class do not typically attend public events, do not participate in the assembly, and are largely absent from the civic spaces where the drama of this day will unfold. That absence is itself part of the story. You walk toward the Agora. The Agora is the heart of Athens, not the religious heart, that is the Acropolis, the civic heart, the commercial heart, the intellectual and social heart. It is an open space, roughly 300 meters long and 150 meters wide, bounded by stoas long colonnaded buildings that provide shade and shelter, and by temples, fountains, administrative buildings, and the constant churning presence of people. Every free morning in Athens, the Agora fills. Farmers bring produce. Merchants set up stalls. Political debate erupts in clusters of men. Philosophers argue under the shade of columns. Slaves carry goods for their owners. A man sells fish from a basket. Another is having a loud disagreement near the money changers' tables. The Agora is everything that the Acropolis is not. The Acropolis is ordered, sacred, formal, elevated. The Agora is loud, messy, democratic, horizontal, and it is era in this space of public life, of argument and commerce, an encounter that Socrates spent most of his adult life. Imagine him here on a normal day. Not this one. A short man, famously ugly by ancient accounts, snub-nosed, bulging eyes, the kind of face that people noticed not for beauty, but for intensity. He wore a simple himation, a cloak, the same one people joked he wore in all seasons. He wore no sandals. He owned almost nothing. He charged nothing for his conversations. He had no school, no institution, no written works. Everything we know about his philosophy comes from the men who listened to him. Primarily Plato, who was in his 20s when Socrates died and who spent the rest of his long life writing dialogues in which Socrates appears as the central figure. Here, in the Agora, Socrates would approach people, a general, a craftsman, a politician, a young man who considered himself wise, and he would ask them a question. What is courage? What is justice? What is piety? And then he would listen to their answer and ask another question, and then another. And within a short time, the person who had considered themselves an expert on the subject would find themselves utterly unable to define the very thing they had built their life around. This was the Socratic method. It was also, for many of the people on the receiving end of it, deeply humiliating. This is the reason he was put on trial. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Across the Agora, to the west, you can see the Hephaestion on its low hill, a temple to the god of the forge and the goddess Athena, built around the same time as the Parthenon but better preserved, because it was converted into a Christian church in the early Byzantine period and thereby escaped the worst of what time does to abandoned stone. In 399 BC it is complete and intact, and its bronze cult statues gleam inside the dim interior. Around its base, outside the sacred precinct, there are metal working shops. You can hear them even now. In the early morning, the rhythm of hammer on metal, the hiss of cooling iron. The Agora is never quite silent. To the south of the Agora stands a group of administrative buildings. The Helia, the large jury court that is the oldest and most prestigious. In Athens, the Metroon, the archive of the Athenian state, which also serves as a sanctuary of the Mother of the Gods. The Bouleuterion, the council house, where the 500-member bowl meets to prepare business for the full assembly. And near these civic buildings, in a structure that archaeologists have tentatively identified based on excavations and ancient descriptions, is the building that matters most on this specific day. Te Prison. Athens called it the Desmatian. It was not a large building. It was not designed to hold great numbers of people for long periods. Athenian legal punishment was generally swift, involving fines, exile, loss of citizen rights, or death, not lengthy incarceration. The prison was a temporary holding place, and Socrates had been in it for 30 days. The 30-day delay requires explanation, because it is one of the strange details that history hands us, and that tells us something true about the texture of ancient life. On the day of the trial, which had taken place a month earlier, the sacred ship of Athens had just departed for the island of Delos. This ship made an annual pilgrimage to Delos, the birthplace of Apollo, in commemoration of the mythological voyage of Theseus to Crete. While the ship was away, the city was under a religious injunction against carrying out the ship could not be hurried. The gods would not wait, and so Socrates, having been convicted by a jury of 501 citizens and sentenced to death, was returned to his cell to wait for the ship to come back. He used the time well. His friends visited constantly. The dialogues that Plato later wrote, the Euthyphro, the Crito, the Phaedo, are set in this period, or in the hours of this final day. We do not know exactly how much of what Plato wrote reflects the actual conversations of those weeks, and how much reflects Plato's own philosophical development. The man and the literary character have been inseparable for 24 centuries. What we do know is this: Socrates did not try to escape. He had the opportunity. His wealthy friend Crito offered to arrange it. Refused. He believed the laws of Athens, even unjust ones, had to be obeyed by those who had chosen to live under them. He had spent 70 years in the city. He had fought for it in 3 military campaigns. He had benefited from its institutions. To flee now would be to betray everything he had argued for. Consistency mattered more to him than survival. Outside the prison, the city continues its morning routine, entirely unaware of the weight of what is happening inside. Walk north from the Agora, along the Parthenon Way, the main processional road that cuts through the city from the Dippolon Gate in the northwest to the Acropolis in the southeast. This is the widest road in Athens, perhaps 10 meters across, paved with stone, and it is the road along which the great Panathenaic festival procession moves every 4 years, carrying a new woven robe, a peplus, up to the statue of Athena. On normal days, it is a commercial artery, busy with foot traffic and occasional carts, lined with the kinds of shops and stalls that cluster wherever people consistently walk. Follow it northwest toward the city gates, and you reach the Kerameikos, the potter's district, named for the clay soil that makes it ideal for ceramic work. This is one of the liveliest neighborhoods in Athens. The smell here is different. Wet clay, wood smoke, the particular mineral sharpness of fired ceramics cooling on racks outside workshop doors. The potters of Athens are famous throughout the Mediterranean world. The black figure and red figure pottery that Athenian craftsmen produce is found in Italy, Spain, Egypt, and deep into Scythian territory to the north. A single well-painted Athenian amphora might take weeks to produce and travel thousands of kilometers before it holds someone's wine. Beyond the potter's workshops, the Kerameikos opens into something unexpected. The city's formal cemetery. Athens buried its most honored dead here, along the sacred way that leads west toward the sanctuary at Eleusis. The grave markers here are remarkable sculpted stone reliefs, showing the dead in moments of ordinary life. A woman looking into a jewel box, a man with his dog, a youth with his horse. Not heroic postures, not martial glory, just a person caught in a moment. Remembered. The emotional restraint of these grave markers is characteristic of Athenian art. At its best, they do not shout grief. They ask you to feel it quietly. Socrates would have passed this cemetery many times. He would have known people buried here. Several of his friends had died in the great Sicilian expedition of 415 to 400 BC, the catastrophic military adventure in which Athens sent 200 ships and perhaps 40,000 men to conquer Syracuse in Sicily and lost almost all of them. The defeat broke the back of Athenian imperial power and set in motion the chain of events that ultimately ended with the city's surrender to Sparta in 404 BC. By 399 BC, Athens has only recently been restored to democratic rule after the brutal oligarchic regime. the 30 tyrants that the Spartans imposed following their victory. The city is politically wounded. The democracy is fragile and frightened and looking for threats, which brings us, with the directness that history sometimes offers, to the charges against Socrates. He was accused of two things. First, impiety. Specifically, failing to acknowledge the gods that Athens acknowledges and introducing new divine beings. Second, corrupting the youth of Athens. The jury of 501 citizens, an odd number specifically to prevent ties, voted 280 to 221 to convict. Then, in the penalty phase, Socrates was given the chance to propose his own punishment. He famously suggested that his punishment should be free meals at public expense for the rest of his life, the honor given to Olympic champions. When pressed, he offered a small fine. The jury, likely insulted, voted for death by an even wider margin than they had voted for conviction. The men who brought these charges were not monsters. Meletus was young and probably sincere in his religious concerns. Anytis was a democratic politician who genuinely associated Socrates with the oligarchic figures. Critios and Alcibiades would cause such damage to Athens. Lycon, the third accuser, is the least known to us. They believed they were protecting the democracy. They believed the city needed healing, not more destabilization from a man who undermined authority and questioned the gods. They were wrong, but they were not incomprehensible. By mid-morning, the friends of Socrates have gathered at the prison. Plato tells us in the Phaedo that he himself was absent ill, he says. And this absence seems to have caused him genuine guilt for the rest of his life. The others who were present that day include Crito, the old friend who had offered escape, Cebes and Simmias, two philosophers from Thebes, Apollodorus, who was known for his emotional intensity, and who wept loudly and had to be calmed. Phado, who tells the story, and whose gentle, wondering account is one of the most extraordinary documents that antiquity left us. The scene Plato describes is specific enough to feel real, even allowing for literary shaping. Socrates is in conversation, always. He is talking about the soul, about whether it survives death, about whether the philosopher should fear dying. He makes arguments. He listens to counter-arguments. He makes more arguments. He is, on the day of his execution, doing the thing he has done every day of his adult life, thinking in public, with other people, about the things that matter most. Outside this small building, the city does not pause. Walk east from the prison, crossing the Agora, and you reach the Stoa of the Basileus. The Royal Stoa, a small building near the northwest corner of the Agora. It is here that the Archon Basileus, one of Athens' chief magistrates, handles matters of religious law and sacred cases. It was in front of this building that Socrates received his initial summons before the trial. The inscribed laws of Solon, the foundational lawgiver of Athens, are displayed here on stone, visible to anyone who passed. Athens is proud of its written laws. It was one of the first cities to write them down, to make them public, to insist that the law belonged to everyone who could read it. The irony that written law is being used to execute the city's most famous defender of philosophical inquiry does not appear to have been lost on anyone. It was just that most people seemed willing to live with the irony. Further south, past the Hiliaia, where the trial was held, you can see the beginning of the road that leads toward the harbor at Piraeus, 3 kilometers to the southwest. Piraeus and Athens are connected by the long walls, 2 parallel walls, roughly 200 meters apart, that created a fortified corridor between the city and its harbor. The long walls were destroyed by the Spartans after the war in 404 BC. They are being rebuilt now. Haltingly, as Athens tries to restore its power, the construction noise drifts occasionally over the city on the wind, the sound of stone being cut and placed. Athens, without its harbor, would be nothing. The city imports most of its grain from the Black Sea region, from Egypt, from Sicily, when that relationship was not poisoned by the disaster of the expedition. The Athenian navy was the source of its empire, its wealth, its confidence. At Titzaides, Athens controlled a fleet of 200 or more tridames warships with 3 banks of oars, each requiring 170 rowers, each capable of ramming speeds that would punch through an enemy hull. The rowers were not slaves. They were the poorest citizens of Athens, the Thetes, the men who owned too little property to afford armor and therefore served at sea. The democracy owed its particular character partly to the fact that poor men were essential to Athenian military power. That navy is gone now. The Spartans and their allies sank it at the Battle of Aegospotami. In 405 BC, catching the Athenian fleet beached and unguarded, killing thousands of sailors, effectively ending the war. The harbor at Piraeus is a fraction of what it was. There are ships still. There is still trade. The smell of the sea and tar and salted fish still rises from the docks. But the swagger is gone. Athens in 399 BC is a city that has been humiliated and is trying to remember who it is. Perhaps this explains something about why a jury of Athenian citizens voted to kill their most famous thinker. People under pressure reach for certainty. Socrates dealt in questions. Questions were the last thing a wounded city wanted. The afternoon light comes in at a low angle from the west, warm and golden. The kind of light that Mediterranean cities are famous for and that Greek painters tried to capture in the glazes of their ceramics. The Acropolis throws a long shadow eastward. In the shadow, the streets are cooler. People who have finished their morning business are retreating to their homes, to the shade of their courtyards, to the quiet interior life that balances the intensely public character of Athenian civic existence. The Athenian home is designed for this. The courtyard at its center catches light and air. The andron, the men's dining room, opens onto it. The kitchen, the women's quarters, the storage rooms, all face inward. The street side of the house is a wall. The Athenian citizen lives two lives simultaneously. The intensely visible public life of the Agora, the assembly, the gymnasium, the theater, and the intensely private family life that happens behind closed doors, that outsiders rarely see, that women inhabit almost exclusively. The gymnasium, there are several in Athens, but the most famous in 399 BC is the Academy. A grove of olive trees, sacred to Athena, about a kilometer north of the Dipylon Gate, where there are wrestling grounds and running tracks, and space for the kind of informal intellectual gathering that the city excels at. In a generation, Plato will found his formal school here, the first institution of higher learning in Western history. In 399 BC, it is simply a pleasant public space where men exercise their bodies and occasionally their minds. Socrates had his own relationship with physical exercise. He was reported to have danced alone in the mornings for his health, in a way that amused his contemporaries. He also had an extraordinary physical toughness. In the military campaign of Potidæa, he reportedly stood motionless outdoors through an entire night in freezing temperatures, apparently lost in thought, while his fellow soldiers watched in bafflement and wonder. In battle, he was calm under pressure, known for his ability to retreat in good order without panic. He was not the fragile intellectual of popular imagination. He was a stonemason by trade, a soldier by service, a philosopher by vocation. The poverty was genuine but not helpless. He simply had no interest in acquiring more than he needed. In a city whose citizens often define themselves by wealth and display, the Theater of Dionysus is on the southern slope of the Acropolis. You can see it if you stand at the base of the rock and look along the hillside. In 399 BC, the permanent stone theater is still in development. The earlier wooden structure and earthen bank seating is being gradually replaced with stone over the coming decades. But the dramatic festivals happen here. The competitions between playwrights, the comedies and tragedies that are both religious celebrations and civic events. Up to 17,000 citizens could attend. Domitian was subsidized by the state for those who could not afford it. Theater was not entertainment in the modern sense. It was a form of collective self-examination, the city looking at itself through the lens of myth and drama. 24 years before this day, in 423 BC, Aristophanes staged a comedy here called The Clouds. Its central character was a caricature of Socrates, a pompous pseudo-intellectual running a thinkery where he taught students to make the weaker argument defeat the stronger, to escape debts, to undermine religious tradition. The Clouds was performed to an audience of thousands of Athenians. It shaped how many of them thought about Socrates for the rest of their lives. Plato believed this play contributed directly to the climate that made the trial possible. He wrote about it in the Apology, the account of Socrates' defense speech. The fictional Socrates of Aristophanes and the real Socrates of the Agora had merged in the public mind. The fictional one was easier to condemn. Aristophanes, for what it is worth, was among the writers whose work Socrates was said to have enjoyed. History does not record whether they ever discussed the clouds directly. The sun is lower now. The shadow of the Acropolis stretches further. In the houses of the city, fires are being lit for the evening meal. The smell of olive oil heating in clay pans joins the general texture of the city's air. Somewhere in the Kerameikos, a potter is pulling a finished piece from the kiln at the harbor at Piraeus. A merchant ship is being unloaded by torchlight. In the Agora, the last of the day's commerce is winding down. The stall-keepers packing up. The argument circles dispersing into the streets. Inte prison, Socrates is still talking. The Phaedo tells us that, at sunset, the official from the 11, the magistrates responsible for executions, entered the cell and told Socrates it was almost time. This man had visited before during the 30 days of imprisonment, and the dialogue tells us he had come to respect Socrates and was visibly distressed at having to deliver the final instruction. He told Socrates that others condemned by the 11 had cursed him and been angry when he came with this message. He told Socrates that he knew he would not behave that way, that Socrates was the noblest and gentlest and most excellent man who had ever come to this place. Then he turned away and he wept. Socrates sent a slave to wash him and prepare him. He spent a short time with his wife Xanthippe and his 3 sons, 2 still young, 1 nearly grown. The Phaedo describes Xanthippe crying and saying that this was the last time his friends would speak with him. Socrates asked Crito to take her home. The tone of the account suggests a distance between them that may have been real, or may reflect Plato's complicated view of women, or may reflect the demands of what Socrates was trying to do, face death philosophically, without the emotional devastation that a full expression of love for his family would have produced in him. We do not know what passed between Socrates and Xanthippe in those final minutes. We know almost nothing about her beyond caricature. History, which preserved every word Socrates was said to have spoken, did not think to preserve hers. After Xanthippe left, Socrates continued the conversation about the soul. The arguments in the Phaedo are genuinely complex, about the relationship between opposites, about the nature of forms, about whether the soul is a harmony or a substance. They are not comforting in a simple religious sense. They are philosophical arguments, made Wheatcare and Socrates acknowledged when objections troubled him and worked through them. Then the sun touched the hills. The servant of the 11 brought the cup. Hemlock conium, maculatum, acts by blocking nerve impulses. The paralysis begins in the legs and moves upward. The mind remains clear. Socrates, according to the Phaedo, received the cup calmly, asked whether he could pour a libation, was told there was only enough for the dose, and drank. He then walked around until his legs felt heavy, lay down when instructed, and was covered with a cloth. His last words, according to Plato, were addressed to Crito. Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Pay the debt. Do not forget. Asclepius was the god of healing, the traditional sacrifice after recovery from an illness. Whether Socrates meant that death was a cure for life, or was simply attending to a small social obligation with his last breath, or whether the line is Plato's literary invention, scholars have debated for centuries, without resolution. What we do know is that Crito asked if he had any last instructions. There was no answer. The man from the 11 uncovered the face. It who is still. The city around the prison continued. Dogs in the alleys, fires in the hearths. The sound of the sea, 3 kilometers to the southwest. The Acropolis dark against a sky moving from deep blue to the first black of night. The moonlight catching the marble and making it glow faintly. That impossible white. That argument made in stone. Athens would continue for 8 more centuries as a functioning city before it became a provincial backwater under Byzantine rule. The Parthenon would be converted to a church, then a mosque, then have a gunpowder magazine explode inside it in 1687 when Venetian fire hit the building during a battle with the Ottomans. The long walls would be built and destroyed multiple times. The Agora would be built over by Hellenistic, Roman, and then Ottoman structures, its ancient form buried under centuries of other people's urgencies. The prison was probably demolished within decades. Its stones were used for something else. This is what happens to places. They become other places. But something stranger happened to the day itself. The conversation that took place in that small stone building reconstructed, interpreted, transformed by Plato into philosophy, became one of the founding documents of Western thought. The arguments about the soul made in that room on that evening have been read, contested, taught, and refined for 2,500 years. Universities that did not exist when the building was destroyed still teach them. Languages that had not yet developed when Socrates drank the hemlock carry his words. He wrote nothing. Every word we have from him passed through someone else's mind first. His entire philosophical legacy is a reconstruction, which is its own kind of strange. There is a small bronze plaque in the modern city of Athens, near the ancient Agora archaeological site, marking the approximate location where the prison once stood. The surrounding area is a park now, with low stone foundations visible under the open sky. Tourists walk past on their way to the better preserved monuments. The Hephaestion still stands on its hill, the most complete ancient temple in Greece, having survived 2,000 years through the accident of religious conversion. The Parthenon is a partial ruin, but still magnificent. Still the thing your eye goes to first when you are anywhere in the city. Still making the argument it was built to make, even in fragments. The Agora is a field of foundations and a very good museum. Socrates is a name that children learn in school in countries that did not exist in 399 BC, in languages that had not yet been invented, for reasons that are not entirely unlike the reasons his students memorized his words, because the questions he asked have not been answered, because the habit of mind he practiced is one that every age has to choose again whether to protect or suppress, and because there is something in the image of an old man in a plain cloak, in a dusty marketplace, asking you what you actually mean when you use that word, something that turns out to be very difficult to bury. The ship came back. The city carried out its sentence, and philosophy survived the city that tried to end it. This is what cities cannot always know about themselves. Which of their days will matter most? What moment in history should I reconstruct next? Let me know in the comments. And if there is a specific place, a specific day, a city you want to walk through, tell me. The past is larger than any single video, and we have barely begun.